Austin.
Hey, Dr. Lauren, how are you?
I'm good. What brings you in today?
Ooh, a lot. I was kind of having a hard day with my kids, and I had a moment to have some introspection with myself, and kind of just where I'm at emotionally. But I was raised in a family where emotions, like negative emotions, were not okay. And so I never really felt like I was taught how to process those. So when I kind of reached an age, I think it was like think it was around when I was like 20-ish, it was like end of college. That's when I started, like I picked up drinking, and like I never drank in high school. I drank like twice in high school. So I picked up drinking and I was like, holy cow, this just fills a gap in me that makes me feel good, and I don't have to worry about feeling bad, right? Because I was always avoiding those emotions. Um, but that kind of led to me spending my entire 20s drinking a lot. And obviously, as times, more responsibility and things kind of, life happens, that drinking kind of increased to supplement those feelings. Um, and it wasn't until my 30s that I really kind of realized uh, I quit drinking when I had my first child and stopped smoking weed, and I stopped smoking cigarettes. Stopped smoking cigarettes like a year and a half ago, so that was recent. But like all of these vices were to kind of help me avoid feelings. Um, so now I'm in this stage of trying to become a licensed professional, counselor, and I'm challenging myself to sit with these emotions. And sometimes it's just really hard. Sometimes these things feel so big, and I don't know how to sit with them for a very long time. It just feels really overwhelming to me. Um, and it's kind of a process too, because it's like at the same time of feeling overwhelmed, I'm also kind of feeling um, like doubtful that I should be doing this. That if like since I'm not good at processing my own emotions, that like why am I in this course kind of thing. So kind of both those things of feeling doubt and feeling like it's just really overwhelming and hard to sit with these emotions and learn these things at the same time. And it's hard sometimes when I'm learning all these. You learn so much in these course where it's like, every week I feel like I'm learning something new about myself, and sometimes that's uncomfortable as well. So, yeah, I guess I'd say those two things pretty much.
All right. How can I pat myself on the back for something I've actually said or something I may have learned about the client? Hmm. Patting myself on the back, warm introduction, allowing the conversation start. And then something I've learned about my client, a lot of deep diving, willingness to speak about things. What has the client expressed verbally about emotions? It's overwhelming, that it's challenging to deal with his emotions and that he's learning how to do it, that he's a little bit concerned about how that works as becoming a licensed counselor and as a parent. And what has the client indicated non-verbally about emotions? Non-verbally, the client shifts, kind of moves around when they're uncomfortable. And then how do I feel right now? I understand that a lot. Uh, we might not be the same age, but I have children too. So it makes a lot of sense to me as somebody who kind of grew up in a similar household. Emotions were not a thing. And it's easy to overreact than underreact. So that makes a lot of sense. How would I feel if I'd experienced the same situation that the client has described to me? It would be very overwhelming. It's kind of like you're trying to keep your head afloat in something that you feel like should have been taught to you. And it's very frustrating that you almost seem like you missed out on this experience. And now you have to learn while your kids are learning at the same time. how can I combine the emotions that I've identified in the above questions with the content I heard as I listened to the client in order to make a response that clarifies what I understood? I'll say the response once to myself before I speak it out loud. So, client's overwhelmed with dealing with emotions, working through his own emotions, working with his children to teach his children how to deal with their emotions, overwhelmed, frustrated by that. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Austin, you feel overwhelmed because you have to learn alongside your children at, with all the big emotions and the big feelings and trying to get through that so you can teach your children correctly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. And that's funny that you said that because, it is true. I had a conversation with my kids actually and was like, "Hey, I was like, "Hey, look, Dad, I think it was one of those moments where I was apologizing, and I want to make sure that I do that a lot with my kids, and because I don't feel like my parents did do that. My parents did do a good job of that. Let me rephrase. But I know a lot of other parents, friends that didn't. So, but it was one of those moments where I was sitting down and I was having just a moment with my oldest, and I told him that specifically. I'm like, hey, look, man, I'm just learning how to do this, and is it okay if we learn this together? And I had that exact moment. So it's really comforting that you said that, because it is, and it's hard specifically in parenting. When I'm having these big emotions, my kids obviously don't have the mental capacity to understand like reasoning and logic because they're not at an age where their brains develop that yet, and so they're just responding out of their limbic brains and just straight out of emotion, which is, they can't control. And so, yeah, I had a situation this week where my kids were both exerted a lot of energy, and we had we tried to sit them down to eat dinner, and we knew that they just needed to eat and they'd be fine. But my 3-year-old's just crying and nonstop, super loud, and we live in an apartment where we got to, everyone's hearing us, and I'm sure it's just we're constantly trying to keep our kids quiet. And then my oldest was just so hungry and so out of touch with his reality, and it was mouthing off and yelling at my wife and even physically like hitting the table and being frustrated and not listening to us. And it's one of those times where like, I was raised and the way I was raised was a lot different, and you would respect I would never treat my dad this way. Is how I think, right? And so I had to just stay as calm as I could because I knew at the end of it, it's not his fault, and he doesn't have the capacity. He doesn't have the brain, capacity to understand that this situation. And I just needed to give him to take a bite. Um, but sitting with those emotions was such a challenging thing to do. I felt like very angry, very, 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 very angry. And I was like at the tipping point. And I know when I get to that point that I can kind of, blow up where I'll like, hit my fist on the table or anything. I've never laid contact on any of my kids or my wife, but like I hit the table, or I'll make a loud noise and kind of use fear, to motivate my kids. Because that's what I want to do. Because I can't handle my own emotions. It's just ironic because my son can't either, and it's like I didn't, and I kept my cool, but I was feeling very overwhelmed, very angry in the situation. And it was just, in retrospect, looking back, being like, dude, that was a lot, but I'm getting better at like sitting with those emotions, and I'm like getting better and I'm growing maybe a little bit every day, when I do have those experiences and I don't, feed into the anger or the frustration, and I kind of just sit with it and try and connect with him on a level that's healthy, and just talk to him. And so I did, and I was really proud of myself afterwards. Me and my wife were like, well, that was a lot and that was crazy, but we both kept our cool, and we loved our kids and try to communicate with them in ways that they would respond to. So it was a lot, but it was good too.
right. So how can I pat myself on the back for something I've actually said or something I may have learned about the client? Um, for me, I feel like I struggle with paraphrasing. So being able to kind of keep it direct to the client was something I'd pat myself in the back for. Learning about the client is a lot. It's nice hearing that you have the capacity and the determination to want to be better than what you were taught, and that you see your kids as human beings, is not as something that was put on this earth to cater to you. So that's really good to see that, like a parent being a parent. What does the client express verbally about emotions? Again, the overwhelming feeling, the like about to blow feeling with anger coming up quickly, having to work with his kids, how that can be overwhelming. It just kind of stacks on top of each other. The fact that they're proud of their capability and their advancements that they've made and that they see it, and the fact that they express the gratitude that their children are able to work with them as well. And then what is the client indicated non-verbally about emotions? I think when the client gets a little bit uncomfortable about having a deep dive, they take a deep breath and try and like calm down. They get a little bit red in the face and they kind of move around a lot to kind of almost like shake out that feeling. How do I feel right now? Very similar. Having two little kids and two different emotions, two different spectrums of feelings, both going off at the same time. It's almost like you're drowning all of a sudden. It's like, okay, what am I supposed to do? So it does, that is a very connecting feeling for me, being able to know exactly what that feeling is, a feeling that anger bubbling up. And that's such a quick reaction for me as well. And then hearing how somebody else was like, okay, hold up. Let me get in control of this. So I felt the same way. I do understand how that feels. And then how would I feel if I'd experienced the same situation the client has described to me? It's very similar. Um, I experience it when my kids go through their emotions and their big feelings. I try to go in it calmly. And if it's too much, I take a step back and have to get back into myself. I explain that to my boys. We have kind of this understanding where maybe I don't have a great day or they don't have a great day. We tell each other we need to take a step back and then we come back and apologize. So being able to apologize as an adult to a child is very humbling, but I think it's also a huge step forward. So how can I combine the emotions that I have identified in the above questions with the content that I heard as I listened to the client in order to make a response that clarifies what I understood? I'll say the response once to myself before I speak it out loud. So the client is very determined as a parent to be better, not just as a parent, but personally and professionally. They're making the steps, they're striving, they're doing this by themselves. Again, there's no handbook to parenting. So having to learn this one on one is overwhelming, frustrating, aggravating. But being able to apologize to your children and having that connection is a long term. So Austin, you feel determined because you want to be a better parent. And that might be overwhelming, but you're still pushing forward to be a better parent for your children.
Exactly. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks for coming in today. Now the feedback.
Perfect. All right. That was great, Lauren. You're awesome at this. Um, what responses helped you feel understood and what had a positive impact? I feel like both of those questions for me were kind of answered simultaneously when you were talking about like overreacting versus underreacting. And like to me, it was like automatically just like with that little saying that you told me, it was like you just understood.
Mm,
And that made me feel like immediately like, okay, she's a parent, she gets it, you know.
mm,
I think it's easy sometimes where um other parents just might do things differently than other people or be prideful and not being like, oh, well, you know, I've had other families be like, you know, or other dads be like, well, at least your kid didn't do this. And that's like the, well, at least, you know, it's like, well, you're not, you know, being empathetic towards me. You're kind of trying to you're minimizing my situation and you didn't do that. So like you got into the well with me and I like that.
mm,
You started off the conversation. You facilitative? Yeah, you were very facilitative. Like the very first, I think the thing you said to me was like, you know, what's on your mind or something like that.
mm,
And I thought that was a really good way to start it.
mm.
Because to me, it was like, this is exactly what's on my mind, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Um, so I like that. What were some responses that were not accurate to what you were experiencing? I didn't have a whole lot of that. I felt like you have kids and you get it,
Mm,
you know? Um, I don't think there was anything that felt like it took me out of my emotions.
mm,
You kept me in there, and then the things that you said back to me kind of just reflected how I was feeling. But even um, I guess I could talk about that in the next question. But yeah, so I don't think there was nothing really that I felt like that was out of the norm. What responses broke the connection? None, nothing. I think just went over that one. Where were you not facilitative? I think you were really facilitative. There was no point in time where I felt like you made it harder for me to talk.
mm,
And then it says general feedback about the session felt how present the counselor felt and how the nonverbal communication came across. I think you had great presence. Your presence was very attentive. Um, I felt like you were in there with me. I felt like you did a really good job of making me feel like I wasn't alone in the situation. Specifically when you were talking about, you know, how it was hard for you two to be also taught, you know, certain emotions when you were a kid. I like that example, and that felt made me feel more connected with you.
mm,
Giving constructive feedback demonstrates to the professor that you understand clinical skills should look like. This is considered where assessing knowledge skills end of the course. Constructive feedback. Hmm. I think there might have been a little miscommunication in the first section because
mm.
I don't think I think I talked about my kids right before we recorded, and then not, but I don't think I talked about them very much in the first section. So
Okay.
when you,
Ooh, okay.
but I did talk about him in the second session. So
Yeah.
it was that might have been my fault talking about it right before we were actually venting about it right before we filmed. Um, but it did lead me into being able to talk about it in the second section, if that makes any
Okay.
sense.
Yeah.
So that was super helpful. But yeah, I might have communicated, I might have made that more complicated than
No.
it needed to be, but otherwise everything was perfect.
Thank you. All right. Stop recording.